Hi, and welcome to Miss Evans's European History. Today, we'll spend time reviewing Russian history, but before we begin, here's a brief contrast for you to keep in mind. In Western Europe, monarchs were generally called kings and queens. In Russia, monarchs were traditionally called czars, while their wives or female rulers were called tsarinas. Today we begin with a look at the first Romanov Tsar, Michael I, who ruled from 1613 to 1645. He was chosen as Tsar at age 16, helping restore stability after Russia's time of troubles. He negotiated settlements with Sweden and Poland-Lithuania that ended years of conflict. Although Sweden returned Novgorod and several other cities to Russia, Russia surrendered territory that cut it off from direct access to the Baltic Sea. This loss was significant because Peter I later fought Sweden in the Great Northern War to secure this Baltic access. Michael and his wife had 10 children, but only 4 survived to adulthood. Following Michael's death, his son Alexis succeeded him as Tsar. Alexis ruled from 1645 to 1676. He strengthened the power of the Tsar and expanded Russia's territory. In 1649, his government issued the Council Code, a comprehensive collection of Russian laws. The code strengthened the autocracy and legally bound Russian peasants to the land, firmly establishing the system of serfdom. When Alexis died in 1676, at the age of 46, his son Fyodor III succeeded him. Fyodor III ruled from 1676 to 1682. He was physically frail and ruled for only 6 years, but he introduced several important reforms. Most notably, in 1682, he abolished the traditional noble service hierarchy, which had assigned government and military positions according to family ancestry and status. This reform made it easier to appoint officials based on ability rather than inherited rank. The next Russian Tsar, Peter I, came to rule in 1682. His childhood experiences, especially the violent Streltsy uprising of 1682, convinced him that the Tsar's authority must be protected from powerful groups that might challenge it. Here are a few important definitions for you. The Streltsy were hereditary infantry units originally armed with muskets. Many served as guards in Moscow and sometimes became involved in political uprisings. The boyars were members of Russia's traditional hereditary nobility who held considerable influence in government and at the royal court. Peter believed that Russia needed a stronger, modernized military to compete with the major powers of Europe. His goal was to strengthen and modernize Russia by selectively adopting Western European military practices, technology, education, and customs. Beginning with Peter I in 1721, Russia's official monarchical title became emperor, although Tsar continued to be widely used. Peter I, known as Peter the Great, is considered one of Russia's greatest reformers. In 1697, he became the first Russian Tsar to travel to Western Europe. His goal was to modernize and strengthen Russia by adopting Western European ideas. During his journey, he studied European customs, shipbuilding, and manufacturing techniques. Later in his reign, his son Alexei conspired with Emperor Charles VI of Habsburg against him, and when the plot was discovered, his son was sentenced to death. Peter the Great brought the Russian Orthodox Church under state control and reduced the political influence of the boyars. To modernize the Russian military, he imposed heavy taxes, established conscription, and hired European officers to help train the forces. He promoted education and required members of the elite to adopt Western style clothing. Men who wished to retain their traditional beards were required to pay a tax. Peter also expanded the social participation of elite women by encouraging them to attend court gatherings with men. He replaced Russia's traditional calendar, which counted years from the biblical creation of the world, with the Julian calendar used in much of Europe. Peter also is credited with introducing potatoes to Russia. Built in 1714, this is the summer palace of Peter the Great, built on the shore of the Gulf of Finland. One of Peter the Great's major goals was to gain a seaport that would make travel and trade with Western Europe easier. To accomplish this, Russia fought Sweden in the Great Northern War. This lasted from 1700 to 1721. Russia's victory secured access to the Baltic Sea and helped make the country an important European power. In 1703, while the war was still underway, Peter began constructing St. Petersburg on captured Swedish territory near the marshy delta of the Neva River. The city became known as Russia's window on Europe because it connected Russia more closely with Western European trade and culture. The city was constructed largely through the labor of soldiers, peasants, and other workers compelled to serve. Working and living conditions were extremely difficult, and many laborers died from disease, exposure, exhaustion, and inadequate food. Although historical estimates vary considerably, the construction came at a significant human cost. Peter transferred the Russian government from Moscow to St. Petersburg around 1712 and required many nobles and officials to relocate there, establishing the city as Russia's new capital and a symbol of his westernization program. Peter the Great had cascading water fountains built to symbolize Russia's complete capture of the Baltic shores from Sweden. It is difficult to see from this angle, but there is a man in the middle of the fountain where the water is spraying out, and he's holding the mouth of a lion. The man symbolizes Russia, and the lion symbolizes Sweden. The Romanov dynasty lasted from 1613 to 1917. That's 304 years. The earliest Romanov czars, including Michael I, Alexis I, and Fyodor III, were buried in the Cathedral of the Archangel in Moscow. Beginning with Peter the Great, who died in 1725, nearly all Russian emperors and empresses were buried in the Peter and Paul Cathedral, located inside the Peter and Paul Fortress in St. Petersburg. Nicholas II, the final Romanov ruler, was executed with his wife and children by the Bolsheviks in July of 1918, following the Russian Revolution of 1917. The remains of Nicholas, his wife Alexandra, and their 3 children were reburied in the Peter and Paul Cathedral in 1998. Here's today's focus question. How did Peter the Great's political, military, economic, and cultural reforms transform Russia into a major European power? Take a minute to pause and ponder, and then respond.